right, welcome. Happy Hump Day, happy Wednesday. As I am recording this, uh, this is who was this? Class 8 in the Hexcrawling 101 series, in which we will talk about landmarks and discovering same and searching for them, and basically just finding stuff or helping your party find stuff. Let me turn on the light here. I don't know if it really helps, but there we go. A little more light. Finding stuff, helping find stuff, running the mechanics. Devious Dungeon Painting says, excellent topic. Yes, because you, Devious Dungeon Painting, were the inspiration for this, as they asked me the question. They were trying to follow up in the end of I forget which video it was, had a question for me, and they ended up throwing it later on Facebook, and I thought, this is probably a good time to cover the topic. So I sent him some stuff, a few thoughts. But I thought, yeah, this is probably something we can talk about. We can and should talk about. So this is what we're here to do today. So bring your questions, bring your problems. Hey, Keith Herthy Jr. gives the woot. Awesome. I actually did a little bit. I know, believe it or not, sometimes I actually do a little bit of prep. And here I am in I'm just going to call it Ouija.io, which is where I do all this stuff. And by the way, as a bonus, I haven't done this yet, but I experimented with it, and it looks like I can send out links for people to at least view these. And so if you're a patron or a channel member, I'll send you a link, and you can have access to this amazing whiteboard, so you can check it out at your leisure as a thanks for the support. And I got another Patreon, a new Patreon. So I want to say, kind of shout out, thanks to them for being a supporter. So here we are. I actually did a little bit of work. So there are probably lots of ways to skin this cat. And I guess the first thing so let me back up a minute. So what we're talking about here is you've got your party, they're on a hex crawl. Doesn't matter whether you're there seeing your map or a version of your map, or you're using the map privately. But of course, if you're using, say, 6 mile hex, just say for example, and the party moves into a hex and you've got something there. Some kind of, I'm calling them landmarks, points of interest, whatever you want to call it. Something is there. Could be a dungeon, could be a town, could be whatever it is that you've decided is major enough that you have marked on your map. And it could be more than one thing, depending on what you're doing, depending on what methods you are using to populate your hexes. They may very well be multiple things within a hex. It's really going to depend. But now your party's here. They're in the hex. And you might be thinking about, well, how do they see this thing? Or how do I decide whether they see it? Or how do they decide whether they find it or not? How does that work? And that's what we're going to probably get. It's probably the meat of what we're going to get into today, though I'm happy as always to muck around in other related subjects as they come up. You notice over here, I set up a list of called landmarks. I just kind of rough these out. You can use these, not use them, figure out your own. But I think there are, probably want to think about first is, what kind of categories of landmarks do you have? Devious Dungeon Painting is like keyed locations. It's a good way to do it, to think about it. So you have these landmarks or keyed locations, and I like to think of them in different categories. One is major. These are ones I think are fairly obvious. They are from a distance, you're going to kind of know that they're there. You know, you think about a major town or city, when you kind of come over the horizon towards a city, generally speaking, you're going to kind of know, it's there. Even if you don't see, in terms of a fantasy setting, you don't see that the skyscrapers or lights in the sky that indicate, oh, that the city is coming or the town is coming. You're generally, just even from the outskirts, you're going to kind of know, because the city and all the attendant infrastructure around a city, it's going to make its presence felt in the landscape. If you're looking at a major location, it has made its presence is felt. Maybe I'll write that in here. Its presence is felt in the landscape. It has a heavy presence. You could also call it a footprint on the surrounding landscape. And this can take the form of many different things. And what I'm trying to think of is very generically, because you get, sure, Todd, that's great for a city or a town, but I'm talking about an ancient crypt or something else. And what I mentioned this to Devious Dungeon Paintings when I talked to them about it, is my thing anyway, something that I like to talk about. It's something I call it dread usually. Well, I might as well make a I talk about something called, I like to think about as dread. And dread is, and there's probably a positive one. I usually think of in terms of dungeons and kind of horrible places. So I'm usually thinking of the bad kind of sense you get about something. But there could be an opposite, some kind of hopeful, euphoric feelings you also get, which is essentially okay when you're coming near a cemetery. What might you feel about that environment? How does that environment make you feel? Remember, we're playing in a fantasy realm. I usually like to think of literary devices in which those, if you think of it, say, in a Stephen King novel, potentially, I don't actually read Stephen King, but that there's a feeling around there that even if you don't necessarily know there's a cemetery around the corner, the world is shaped by the presence. Particularly, let's say if it's haunted and there's tons of skeletons and zombies and who knows what else and what's worse in there. Let's just say all that negative energy, all that undead vibe. It's not trapped in a bottle. It seeps out into the world. So in some surrounding area, you feel that there's maybe it's less color, maybe it's colder, there's not as much birds, life, just the trees are more shriveled or gnarled, or everything just seems a little bit meaner or angrier or just deader, something about that. And you can think about the bigger a place is, the stronger it is, the more it has that presence, the more it has that whatever it is, a power associated with it, then the further out that presence is going to go. If you're just talking about a little family graveyard plot that may be unsettled or desecrated, yeah, sure, maybe that you wouldn't feel that if you're even on a road a couple hundred yards away, you just wouldn't notice it. But if you're talking about some massive barrow downs that A has very strong undead creatures in it, so that A is the level of power, then B it's very vast, has a lot of them, then you might expect to feel that from some distance away. You don't know. The wind is cold. The hackles on the back of your neck. You get goosebumps. All those kinds of feelings, and those all can be ways of telegraphing to the players that something bad is here, whether they want to do it or not. And I call that dread. So going back to your major landmarks are one that we can consider either are. You could be that, hey, that's the thing you're going to notice when you're walking through this hex. You're walking through this hex of land, this thing is going to kind of call your attention to it. If it's a forest hex, it's going to be something that maybe by virtue of where it's placed or the height or something else, that if you look at all around, if you're at all looking around for it, you're going to tend to see it. All roads, the trails that you're going to be walking in are going to kind of all be walking towards that thing. Everything's going to pull you. It has almost like gravity that's going to pull you into it. You're going to see it. You're going to notice it. It's a waterfall and it's very loud. Or like I said, it's some kind of evil force that's very strong. So you just kind of feel it. Or it is even a great force. Well, why is it the trees seem to be greener in this direction? So you go, oh, okay, what is that? It's something that's going to really pull you in. That's kind of major. And you can decide whether for you major means that they'll just entering the hex, they're going to see it, or if you want to work some kind of X in 6. We'll get into adjudication a little later, but you can decide. But I think major something that you're going to have, odds are you're going to see this one just by virtue of moving through. At some point as you move through the hex, you're going to get an angle, you're going to just tend to see it. Minor is obviously less obvious than that. These are the kind of things that you may not see if you're not super close. Remember, a 6 mile hex is 30 square miles. So that major one is so powerful that however you're wandering through those 30 square miles, you're probably going to touch an edge of it somewhere. A minor one, yeah, you might not. A minor one is maybe you do need to actually poke around by it, unless you get lucky, because I think luck is usually, is a good thing, a good factor to keep in mind. So you're less likely to find it, but you still might. But it's definitely something that you're more often going to find it when you're looking for it, and then there's a less chance you might just run into it by chance. But the chance is still there. And then I have two that you could probably roll into one. I don't know, I just like to think of them a little bit differently. One is something that's hidden. I use hidden for the kind of stuff that it's not actively hidden, but it's, the ancient city of Teotihuacan that's been overgrown by the jungle. It's there, but just things have happened to kind of hide it. Maybe it's an old barrows and they're all overgrown with trees and whatnot, so they seem like odd hilled forest until you kind of get closer, or you're able to uncover it somehow. But you're still some traces of things, but it's more or less been sort of covered over and obscured. And then I have secret, which is one I look at secret as this is being actively kept. Something is made, this is the thing like maybe a really good hideout that people are trying to keep really secret is in that secret category. But depending on how you want to work it, I could see if you just want to make one category for both of them. And of course, you don't have to use these categories at all. But this is how I like to think of them. And once you have these, then we can start to classify our locations, which I guess I'll make another thing here. So we'll call it, location classification, all right? Or actually, well, I'll take that out of there for a second. There we go. So, we got the name, and then we can have, the type, which should be that major, minor, hidden, secret. The Castle of Arg, for example. Something like that. So then you can start thinking about taking out your landmarks and trying to and making some concept of some level of, okay, how am I going to classify this? These landmark classifications I'm mentioning are probably it's very generic, right? It could be a factor of size plus all kinds of stuff. Some people like to talk about, I don't think I've ever been to Pittsburgh. People say that Pittsburgh actually tends to be kind of, even though it's a fairly major city, because of how it is in the hills, it actually is kind of hidden there. So you would take those things into account. So you might say, well, it's a big city, but it's kind of hidden. So I'm going to classify this as a minor landmark, even though the place itself is not minor in terms of standing or size, but because of its environmental, because of how it sits in the environment, right? So you're going to want to take multiple factors to figure out where these fit for you. And of course, if you are, and in Devious Dungeon Paintings went through this, where they were zooming into the sub-hex level, that's going to affect things also. So you can think about, there's kind of a couple of ways. I guess I should just get into adjudication here. There's a few things you want to look at. Like, are you doing this? Are you keeping it at a 6 hex kind of level? Let me just write this in here. Or are you what's called level of abstraction? Or are you going into sub-hex levels? Because if you're doing a sub-hex level, then you may want to get into looking at, well, which sub-hexes are they in? And then you can also think about these landmarks in terms of how many sub-hexes can they be away from it where they'll get traces of it. So you might look at a major landmark and say, you know what, they could be, if I'm dividing my 6 mile hex into 1 mile, 6 1 mile hexes, then you can say, they might, anywhere within 4 hexes, they are going to have some chance to find it. If it's minor, I'm going to say 3 hexes, hidden, 2 hexes, secret, 1 hex. You can do that. Or if you're doing it just on you're keeping it on the 6 mile hex, you might say, major 4 and 6, minor 3 and 6, hidden 2 and 6, secret 1 and 6. If you want to do kind of X in 6 attributes, you've got a lot to figure out there. There's multiple ways, really endless ways to do that. Actually, I forgot to put the next. I was going to put that, and I forgot. Hold on a second. Let me add this in. I'll call this X in 6. So when you're thinking about adjudicating, I'll put that. Where will I put that? Yeah, put that there. There's 2 things you want to consider. One is incidental. I'm calling this incidental discovery. And then there's deliberate discovery. Incidental discovery is they're not trying to find it. They're not literally looking, but this is what I would call, accidental finds, or I guess incidental. Incidental is a good word. So, it's accidental, it's incidental. It's not their main quest. They are moving through the hex, and this thing is there, and there's a chance that just by moving through, remember they're using trails, they're trying to take the easiest path in the environment. They're not moving in as a crow flies straight across, or almost never straight across. So they're winding, they're moving. Okay, do they run into this thing? there's a chance, so we can again depend on, is it major, minor, hidden, or secret as to how much it is. So then that's just them looking for it. They're doing something else, but there's a chance that they might run into this while they're doing something else. We're going to roll dice. And then deliberate is they're undertaking a specific action to search. Party undertakes a specific search action. Depending on what system of hex crawling you're using, that could be, I think, some like I want to say Into the Word and Wild, and it might have a literal player action they can take. They can spend some amount of their day to say, okay, we are going to search this hex. That's deliberate discovery. Or if just in the fiction, the party thinks, you know what, I think either we think we've hit our destination, now we just gotta find it. We think we're in the right ballpark for where the hidden shrine is, so now we just have to find it. Maybe their map says it should be somewhere in the, in the northwest hills of Blobdy-Blue, and hey, we think we're in the northwest hills of Blobdy-Blue, so now we just gotta drill down here and find it, right? That would be the kind of search. Or there might be an abstracted, you might say in your travel rules, there might be an abstracted search action where the party can do things like move, search, hunt, camp, whatever. So they're going to take the search action, which is going to be deliberate. So depending, you probably want to have, or I would say you should have, the odds of finding things be better if it's deliberate, where they're actually looking, than incidental. So incidental, they're just kind of accidentally just running into it. Oh, look at that. Just happens. Oh, look, there's a shrine, a hidden shrine here. We never knew. Versus deliberate, hey, we're looking for the shrine. And it might even be that depending on what's going on, the context and everything, they might even be looking for something else. But the point is that they're dedicating time being, putting forth effort in an organized way to search out an environment. So you want to give them some benefit of the doubt, whether you're rolling X and 6, whether you're using attributes, whether you're leaning on classes or skills, you probably want there to be some kind of bonus. So if I was using X and 6 and I had 4, 3, 2, 1, maybe I'll put these in parentheses. All right, what did I have? I have major, I had 4 and 6. Minor will go 3 and 6. Hidden we'll say is 2 and 6. And then secret is 1 and 6, right? Those sounds pretty good numbers. So then we might say incidental discovery is just, that's the roll. And if they're doing deliberate, maybe you say, if you get +1. Did I put =1? Yes, I did. No, yeah, +1. Right? Ryan Smith says, deliberate discovery may be like solving a puzzle or using a key or something too. Sure, the fictional part of that, Brian Smith, is completely up to you. If you need something like that, if something requires something, deliberate discovery could just mean could be as much to me as, okay, because when you're navigating through space, you're just trying to find the quickest way to A to B, right? Okay, these trails, this road, the open plain, whatever, and we're concentrating on navigating and just getting through. Deliberate is you're undertaking action to search, so you're no longer concerned about getting through the hex and just getting at speed. You're interested in uncovering things. You're literally looking for the things there to be found. If the circumstances are that something is required, but I think we're talking about is, okay, now we're fanning out. We're saying, okay, we're all going to meet back here. We're all looking around. We're all triangulating our spaces. We're all going to go out, spend the next 4, 5, 6 hours walking in different directions through this area, and we're going to climb up trees or climb up hills we can find, or stand on large rocks and peer, or if we've got binoculars or spy glasses or telescope, and we're going to use all the tools we have. We're going to triangulate. We're going to do all these things. That's what you're doing. That's what that deliberate discovery is. Here you are now basically canvassing the area, using whatever means necessary. And of course, if your group, your party comes up with really specific ways to really do that, then, that's the part where I go, well, then don't make them roll. But if they just say, hey, we're going to spend the whole day canvassing these woods, then they can find it. Let's see. Deliberate discovery requires a check of some kind with a chance not to find it right, or is it guaranteed they find it, they pay the cost? You can go either way. I would definitely, a lot of it comes down, so we get into, which is going to be really how you want to manage your days, right? So let's just say, we'll just put a cycle on here. We're going to say that you have 3 hour blocks. Okay, well, we're going to say you get 3 hour blocks of time in your day. So that would be, we're talking 12 hours of daylight, give or take 12 hours day, right? 12 hours night. Okay, so 3 hour blocks. So you have four. And I'll just put this in here, right? Per time block, per time, I'll just put spent, per time spent. There we go. So you could tell your party, listen, if you, I would definitely be down with the guarantee. I would probably say, look, if you want to spend, for every 3 hours you spend searching, at a +1, at some point that is going to become a guarantee, pretty much, which I'd be fine with as a GM. I would be fine that if I know that something's secrets in 1 and 6, they can basically bump this up to 6 and 6 by spending 6 hours, spending basically their whole or half their day searching for it. They're going to find it. I'm fine with that. You can change the odds or do whatever to make it more. If you want to make that more, because you could say something like 6 secret, you're actually like -2 and 6, which means you have to bump up and search a bit to find it, or have some other kind of physical positioning. That's fine. I tend to like a combination, Brian Smith, of the dice and the guarantee, kind of like searching your 10 by 10, or searching in a room. Hey, if you're just going to search, you can roll dice, unless you're going to spend, that 6 hour, if it's a 60-foot room, you're going to spend 6 hours searching every 10 by 10 square foot area, then you spend that much time. I'll give it to you, but otherwise I'll make you roll, kind of thing. And I feel the same way about this. So if you want to just spend, because there might be tension, hopefully there is a tension over, well, we just don't have days and days just to spend mucking around here, so we need to kind of make a choice and do that. Then they have to, leverage your things in the fiction to try to narrow things down, and then give folks, if they have the time to burn, then let them burn the time. So I'm fine with that. And then incidental discovery doesn't have that, because they're not actually spending that time doing this. It's just whatever they happen to right along the way. Whereas deliberate, you were actually looking. Now here I've been using X and 6 as an example. You don't have to. You could use your attributes, whichever attribute you want. Wisdom to me is a good one for this, because it's kind of, I don't know, I think of it as sort of your intuition, your feel. But you could be intelligence, if maybe it's something that, say, somebody had read, when they'd been in university, or they'd spent time in the monastery as a child, and they'd flip through old maps and things, and then maybe they'd seen that on there. How were they able to recall some things about that, or what did they learn? You might go intelligence. I probably wouldn't do, I suppose you could do constitution if it's just a matter of, you got to find this thing in the swamp, and you just need to plunge through the swamp enough to find it, and that is kind of just a will. Then you might say constitution. Strength and dex, probably not, but it's up to you if you can find the argument. To those, you can do that. So you can rely on rolling under attributes, in which case you'd want to change what these, or whichever classification works for you, to make some kind of modifiers to that kind of roll. I suppose, wisdom for intuition, intelligence for, learning, recall. Devious Dungeon Painting says, if you make a keyed location, you should want them to find it, so it seems counterproductive to make it very hard to find. Well, this is true, but sometimes that's part of the whole puzzliness of it, right? It's the people didn't want it to be found, and then you're part of the whole experience for the party is uncovering it, is finding it, is looking for the clues to do it. So yes, as a GM, we go, yeah, I really want you to find the hidden shrine, but it is also called the hidden shrine. So depending on what clues you're able to do, it could be something, for example, let's say this is part 3 of your ongoing adventure, and in parts 1 and 2, or say, the party was trying to put together certain clues. If they find all the clues, that will pretty much point them directly to the hidden shrine. But what happens if they only find 1 out of the 3? but they still decide, hey, you know what? We only have X amount of time to stop the sacrifice that's going to open the gate to the lower plane. So we got to find anyway. And it's their choice to head out into the wilderness with not all the knowledge at their disposal. I think then as a GM is like, hey, now, okay, now you got to deal with that. And I'm just gonna say, well, I wish you had those other clues. It would make it easier, but I'm not suddenly going to have put hand painted signs on the side of the road saying hidden shrine this way. You're going to have to figure it out. And of course, you could think about, there could be many methods for them to get more clues, both in earlier situations and in the wilderness. Like I mentioned to Devious Dungeon Paintings through in our earlier conversations, things have traces. So I mentioned dread. If that's one trait, there's traces of stuff. You've got activity, you've got, a power. I'm talking about like mystic power, mystic kind of power. Could be negative energy, could be magic. And then you obviously you have the physical remains, remnants, traces, activity. Okay, so there's a hidden shrine here. Great. But cultists are coming and going. They're carting in human sacrifices. They're bringing in food. They are going out on patrol. So what does that mean? You're going to have trails. If they're bringing in carts full of food and ammunition and weapons and captives, then they have to have some kind of road of some sort to bring the cart in on. They're not just bringing it through naked forest or whatever without leaving any kind of track. There's going to be a good old wagon trail that's going to go run back and forth, because presumably they'll be doing this more than once, so they'll be doing that. So activity. Could be other things. Okay, so you have cultists or you have something else. There's a village nestled in the hills. Well, where does that village get food from? Are they getting it from a water source? And you're going to have people fishing back and forth, maybe traps for fish, other things like that. Those are also traces. If they're hunting, you're going to see traces of that. If they're farming, you're certainly going to see traces of that, or herding or anything else. There's going to be signs of activity. And same thing if you have oh, look, there's an orc tribes moved in the area. Well, there's going to be traces of that. They're not going to be invisible. They can try to cover things up, in which case you can determine how well they're able to do that. But chances are there's going to be things to be found, and unless they have other mitigating factors like magic or other things, in which case of course factor that in. But generally speaking, when places where people or things are living, there's gonna be traces left of their living. There's that. If there is power, if there is, like I mentioned in talking about dread, I'll just put the impact and traces on the environment of strong eldritch. I always like the term eldritch energies and powers. If you've got magic users, necromancers, undead, weird alien Cthulhuoid things from beyond the sun, all that weird unearthly energy also is going to impact it. You could think about, even in terms of things that are magical, but maybe they belong where, this kind of crosses over with activity, but, dragons are in the area. If there's a dragon lair nearby, it's probably going to be a bunch of physical traces. There also might be these kind of power sort of energetic traces. So what would that look like? Wizards probably going to want to put their towers in places that are strong with magical energy. It's going to have a pull. People are going to be able to kind of detect it. If they're attuned to it, what does the landscape look like if there's a well of magical energy nearby? It's probably going to seep into the environment and twist things in certain ways. Let's see. Brian Smith says, or do have hand-painted signs pointing to some very dumb bandits trap. Yeah. Like that, what the old P.T. Barnum tale of having, what was it? This way to the, what did they call it? The thing was, it was a word for exit, but it was, egress. This way to see the egress. And it was an egress, means an exit. but they, of course, they was thinking that rubes and folks would just see that and think there was some other exhibit this way, and that would push them through, and then they would find themselves dumped outside the whatever the exhibit was, so that they wouldn't tarry too long. But yes, you could have some signs pointing the wrong way or something. Brian Smith asks, is dread like a regional influence? Yeah, it's something I like to think about. I like to think about in lots of cases when it's kind of that thing of like when a party, or I like to think about what happens when you really feel, and this is something I like from literary, it's kind of that literary influence when the hero gets somewhere and they just feel that sort of, in terms of like dark, evil, forbidding, that you're being watched, you're starting to get the cold sweats, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, you get goosebumps, like you can just feel almost this primordial, like your primitive lizard brain reaching out to you and saying like there's something beyond you that is here. And I like to think of that as, yeah, as this influence of really powerful creatures in their environment, is that they just, it's like that aura, but that dragons and creatures have. But to me, it's more pervasive. It's like you are entering a spot and you know that something is really, really nasty is here. So I call it dread. And it's something that you can use to call out when there might be something nearby. Maybe you don't see it, you don't feel it, but the environment reflects it in both potentially in physical ways, but in sort of this almost a emotional, subconscious way. But back to traces. So we have activity, we've got power, energy, and of course you get physical remains, remnants, traces. This kind of feeds back into activity, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. This is if, hey, you're coming across these ancient ruins and maybe you can't really see them, but you notice that they're odd mounds. And if you look about it, you'll say, this doesn't really look like a hill. It's too small. It doesn't really make sense here. And it's kind of like, huh, what is that? Maybe you see a little bit of stone sticking out of the dirt and it's got hieroglyphics or symbols, or it's clearly been sculpted. Oh, okay, there's that. Or maybe they're old road signs, old stones marking territory, anything like that. These physical traces that they just either they weren't covered up all the way if someone was trying to actively cover them up, or they might be there that just time didn't erase. Maybe it's some stones that fell down, or it could be anything, right? But these actual physical bits of whatever this landmark is that are poking out of the ground, here, there, everywhere. Brian Smith says, they like the idea of the bad guy having an influence in the area. I wrote up something a little homebrew stuff for different villains affecting nearby hexes and giving you tailored roll tables. Ah, cool. I like that. Yeah, and that it also plays in with that stuff like the Dark Lords from the Domains of Dread and stuff like that, which I also, is kind of something that appealed to me about that, is it kind of plays on the same idea of these very powerful creatures really affecting their environment in different ways. And then you, as someone moving through this space, especially from the outside, picks up on it. Maybe someone who lived there would be too used to it, but you, as you're walking in from neighboring hexes, traveling around, all of a sudden you're like, ooh, this is something bad. Or it could potentially be some kind of euphoria. If it was, there's a scene in the beginning of the last Unicorn, the movie. I don't know if it's in the book. It's probably something I should go and read. I've never actually read the last Unicorn, the book, but some hunter, somebody's moving through the woods and he recognizes that it's the unicorns, the woods of the last unicorn. He ends up saying something like, hey, stay here, like you're safe here and everything's good here, we're gonna leave you alone. But the idea, I guess, for this point is that he could see that this wood was just brighter, and I think it was like spring or sometime where maybe it shouldn't be as bright and as colorful and as vibrant and alive as it was. And he recognized that and said, okay, there's a unicorn here. I could feel their presence in a positive way. And that's kind of what it's about. If you were going to look at the opposite of dread, that would be that kind of thing. It's, oh, there's a dryad or something, or a unicorn or some other creature here. And so the environment looks brighter and more, there's more flowers and more animals and things like that. Whereas, and then of course the opposite, if it was something nasty or negative, then you might see it being drabber and less alive or physically dead or rotting or some other thing. And so that you get that environmental effect of these powerful entities. Brian Smith says, it's a fun idea to have your map basically show the borders of areas of influence of the largest creatures rather than some geopolitical boundaries. Maybe a druid map would be like that. Yeah, I mean, you just run, the thing is, I think about that stuff a lot, and you just run out of things to mark on the map. Either you have to have, and I don't know any, I suppose maybe you could do it in, well, I know you could do it in Worldographer, because Worldographer has layers, and you could potentially have layers for different boundaries. So you could rattle off a bunch of different maps and mark off different kinds of boundaries if you wanted to. It just becomes how many versions of the map do you want to have? But yes, ultimately it comes down to what's more important for you, and specifically GMs here and players. If your players are sharing the same kind of map, might be less meaningful to them, or they might not matter. But I could definitely see where the map you want to use when you're having kind of true wilderness and you're not working within areas that are all claimed by different forces is, yeah, it would be cool to say like, here is this dragon and this dragon's influence comes out to here, and then you could figure out, well, if you could really take this landmark thing and just make this influence major influence. Or why don't I actually, let me just do that. Why not I just do that? Why don't I just do that? Duplicate it. All right, well, let me spread this out. I'll come down. Woo. All right, let me just, a little housekeeping here. Let's just do this. We'll call this influence. Major. 4 hexes. I'm just using the numbers here. We could play around with them. 3 hexes. Or I'll call this, how would I call this? 4 plus. Two hexes. Probably need to change those names. Price says maps flavored by class. Yeah, each I mean, but you could see each class has their own map. So a fighter's map let me a map of all the strongholds. That actually would be really cool. I mean, this is where I would really like to see VTTs and these kinds of things really get into, is these kinds of, I got in this, I guess a little bit of a sidetrack, but I got an email this morning from, oh, let me see. I don't remember exactly what it's called. It was some kind of VTT that's focusing on like the three-dimensional, almost, I don't know exactly, like you can do, it basically has some kind of 3D engine in there, and you're going to be able to create rooms in 3D and plunk furniture, and they're gonna have all kinds of objects you can throw in there and place light sources and all this stuff. And first one, I wonder, like, why are they reaching out to me? Because most of the time I feel like I'm actually, if I'm not actively dissuading people from VTTs, I'm extolling the virtues of playing Theater of the Mind. But I think I'm just on some kind of email list. I don't think they were specifically reaching out to me. But this is where I think that a lot of these companies want to get into, is that sort of thing. Whereas me, on the other hand, I'm thinking like, I would love to have serious, like, cartographic stuff, serious support for all kinds of math and tables and all that kind of stuff that isn't sexy. It's not, you're not going to be able to make a quick YouTube or TikTok or some video of it that's going to make it seem really cool, but it can allow a lot of stuff. And I think having, instead of giving me 3D where I can lay out a dungeon in 3 dimensions and populate it, I would love one if one had some really serious hex mapping chops where you could have different kind of filters you could highlight. You could have all these different things inside, and then maybe have kind of moving on the hexes and doing all the dice. Like, that's the kind of thing I go like, man, where is that? Where is that version? Where's that VTT for me? It wasn't Dungeon Alchemist. It wasn't Tailspire. I will get the name, especially if they reach out to me, because if what they were asking for is people who would come look at some build. And let me see. Hold on. I'll see if I can pull up the name really quick, because I don't want to waste a ton of time on it. Hold on a minute. Let me see. Riveting audios. I'm looking through RPG stories. It's hard to tell what they've got. They're going to be doing a Kickstarter. I'm dubious, but I told them, I was like, well, if you want to send me a key and maybe send me the build I can mess around with, and I asked them, hey, if you want to send me some keys I can give away, maybe I'll take a look at it because I'll take a look at it. But I really wish someone would do this. Devious Dungeon Paintings and learning about Ouija for me was a game changer. Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad. Maybe it seems like Ouija's. So I've paid for some pro version of Ouija, but I know it has stuff that I know the free version seems like it's pretty good, better than the free version on this one gives you more than the one I was using before, which was whose name I cannot remember at the moment. But yeah, Ouija's cool. There's some things that's lacking still, and hopefully they'll keep developing it. So yeah, if you like this, at least sign up for the free account. I don't have any kind of, I'm not sponsored by them. I have no affiliate agreement. I just happened upon it, and I like to do these kind of mind mappy stuff, and it works really well. And so I'm happy to spread the word. But yeah, sign up, give it a shot. Joseph Peralta says, I just make my hex maps in Wildographer, or I don't know, W/E. Is that Wonder Draft? I don't know. And throw them onto a page in Roll20 and align the hexes. Players never get to see the map, so I don't need to hide anything. Anyways, that's cool. Yeah, I just think that like something in Roll20, I guess my thing is, like, I find my ideal thing is you can have stuff where you can have your hex map, and then when you would move things in there, you could trigger things like rolling for your random encounters, or you're telling how, like, you could just do a lot of the mathiness and a lot of the things that we love to talk about in running hexes and kind of automate them in some neat ways. But that's just not where they tend to put their development time, which I get it. It's kind of niche, and it's not sexy. I mean, to me, I'd be like, who turned on the heat in here if somebody put something like that together? But in terms of your general audience, I think people are much more apt to get excited about playing in kind of a first person view of some 3D environment in their game than fancy schmancy hex maps. I'll look into Tailspire. I don't know Tailspire. I will have to look. But we could think of, if we wanted to do influence in terms of, stop. I want you to do this in terms of kind of dread and maybe even traces. We could think of major, minor. I don't know what that will see. Underneath, I think we'd have to come up with different, because hidden and secret don't quite work in that regard. But we can think of two other ones. We could think of same thing. How far are you away? How far are you away from them? Whoops. And, to get some kind of trace. And this is that thing, to go back to Devious Dungeons Paintings point of wanting people to find it. I think I like to have that balance. Yes, as a GM, I mean, this is part of that goes back to that kind of referee. What kind of GM are you? I like to think of the referee. Hey, as a person, me, Todd, when I'm playing, I'm running my game, do I want the players to succeed? Yes. Do I want them to find everything? Yes. Am I going to bend all the rules that I've created and do things to make sure they do all that stuff? No, I'm not. So in terms of the game, do I want them to find the hidden shrine? Yes. Am I going to make them able to find the hidden shrine? Yes. And if you have some kind of search action or some way of doing deliberate discovery, they can certainly find it. Even with 0 clues, if they spend enough time, and you can set the time frames however you like it to be, however realistic you want. If you want to make it per that time spent in days or in weeks, hey, whatever works for you, they can do that. They can always, in this kind of system, substitute time for expertise. We have no clues, but we know that the shrine is somewhere in these 3 hill hexes. So we're going to spend a week in each hill hex, and we're just going to sweep through and find it. And we know we're going to be out here for a month, and we're going to be fighting off beasts, and we're going to be doing all this other stuff, and we don't care. We're going to find it. Then they can do that. Fine. Or they can assemble clues and find out that it's really in the northwest, supposed to be in the northwest corner and other stuff, and then they can drill down that way, right? But they're going to have the opportunity to find it. And I think it is important to think about in terms of your world building, right? In terms of traces, these are all things that are in the hex. But these traces also manifest into I'll put this down here into, let's call them clues. All right. What do the surrounding areas know So clues would be these things that are externally. If traces and all this stuff, if dread, traces, whatever, this influence is all about in that hex. You're in the hex. Your marker is in the hex with the dungeon. Here are the things that are doing it. Clues are these things that are okay. Now we're talking about we're outside the hex, but we're now in whatever settlement that's maybe it's a hex away, whatever. This is another way you can surf for this stuff. How do these traces? How do they affect people living around it? Because certainly you want to think about, hunters. So, activity probably be marked, by hunters and outdoors, I don't know what, at hunters and other outdoors folk. Power and energy probably marked certainly by magic users, marked by sages, any kind of magic users, maybe even if you have the idea of like a sensitive, maybe they don't have any magical ability themselves, but they just have a good sense. Certainly physical remains, probably also marked by hunters, marked by outdoors folk. Maybe if there are other, other explorers and adventurers. So when you're thinking about, okay, well, the dungeon's over here. Let's see. What was this hex? Remember we looked at this. Let's go back. So, for example, we're in Dorlo, and there's some ruins here, and these seem like this would be pretty obvious. Maybe that's a bad example, because this is all farmland and open country. That's probably, I forget the story behind there, but that's probably something that's pretty obvious. But let's say we're trying to get, I don't know which one's a ruin. Do they have any ruins here? Is there one that's a ruin? That's the only ruin? Okay, well, oh yeah, this is, here we go. So you're in Mewin, and you've got farm country, you got open plains, you've got forest and forested hills, and maybe you're trying to get to this dungeon here. So sure, the average Mewinian is probably sticking to this general area. Maybe getting some firewood from a couple of these hexes here. Hunters are going in, but your average farmer and herdsman probably just in and around here. May not know much, but there are going to be folks, trappers, hunters, things they're coming down this way, following the herds of whatever. Traveling merchants, Brian Smith says, yeah, but the merchants are probably sticking to the road, right? I don't think a merchant is, if you're following this trail from Lomendi to Dorlo to Mewin, kind of, you're probably not bouncing down here. So the advantage that your traveling merchant has is your merchants, which is a kind of a cool way to think about merchants. Your merchants are going to be able to get you. So let's say you're in Mewin and you talk to a merchant. Your merchant is going to have rumors from Lamende, rumors from Dorlo, from Mewin, maybe even from Judd. They get to be almost a little encyclopedia of rumors from a large area because they've traveled through all those recently. So I don't think they're going to have necessarily the knowledge that hunters would have down here, but they may have talked to hunters from Lomende who may have come close to the dungeon this way. Maybe they know something about this from folks in Judd, right? But your hunters, your things. So you want to think about, okay, well, who in here might have kind of come in down here? Who has knowledge of this? Is it completely forgotten to time? And it could be. Some things are like that. Then maybe you got to rely on something else. I mean, if this is where your adventure is, you probably want to think of some way, if it was totally lost to time, that it became unlost somehow. Maybe someone stumbled on it. And maybe there was a hunter and they were tracking some quarry and took them way out of their way. But maybe they were hunting a unicorn, hunting some other mystical beast, an owl bear, and they had tracked it far and wide, and they spent days on the trail, and then they stumbled across it. And then they ended up here, and then they come back home and they say, "Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe what happened to me today. I met Batman." Well, maybe not that, or I ran into 22.19 and look what I saw. That kind of thing. So you want to think about, okay, where does this come from? And I think as GMs, to go back to points made earlier, I think particularly by Devious Dungeons Painting, is that don't keep it too hidden. There's a tendency sometimes to go, oh, it's secret. Nobody's ever seen it. And then, of course, you end up in a trap where you're thinking they're going, well, how do I get the party over here now? I need them to get to 2219. And then someone's going to say, okay, well, maybe if somebody's found it. Like, no, nobody's ever seen it. Well, probably somebody's seen it. They may not have gone into it. They may have only seen it from a distance. Again, if you're using something like I just mentioned with Dread and some other things, they may be scared that they are running way the other way, but they marked it. It marked them. And they brought back, so I'll tie that in here. They brought back that Dread. And they brought it with them back to the town. How about I delete that and then I'll... They brought that Dread with them. Brian Smith says, old crazy Jed telling tales about X22.19. Yeah, I mean, if you're playing a sci-fi game, you could do that, right? You could just say this was in Sector 22.19, whatever, like they would do in something Star Trek. But yes, you might want to, they'd have to come up with some name, which again becomes a clue that the party could use. You say, oh, okay, well, what would they know? It's here. Maybe they'd say roughly, I don't know, we don't have, this is just the Mool Forest. They could say, well, it's in the hills in the northwestern part of or northeastern part of the Mool Forest, which is a fairly large area still, but that's just one clue. And then maybe they get more clues. This is where you can also have landmarks that affect landmark, right? So they have, going back to, we were talking about those traces. Okay, so the actual dungeon is in 22.19, but that dungeon used to be part of a larger complex or something else. It was it used to be the fortress of somebody. Well, they didn't just have that one thing. They had other things. Maybe they had outer walls. Maybe they had watchtowers. Maybe they had other compounds. So those traces, you might, when you start getting into delving in this, suddenly you might mark on your map, yeah, there used to be a watchtower here, and there used to be a watchtower here, and maybe there was an old road that ran here. Maybe even Mewin's an old city, so there used to be a road that runs along here. Maybe you can't see it in the fields actually because they all got picked up and plowed over and they all removed the stones. But once you get to say 1917, if you end up in here, you might find that there's a road that runs towards that area. Let's see, Michael Linky or Link. Sorry, I don't know. Apologies if I mispronounced it. Apologies in advance. Says, I use my hex map to make a point crawl. It sounds crazy when I describe it, but I create a probability cone of hexes between point A and B to randomly determine their precise path. The path that's determined informs which points of interest they run into during that trip. Whew, a probability cone. Wow. All right, so the example is, so the players don't move southwest in Hex 2020. They actually go from the watchtower to the village and use the hexes to determine what can happen along such a trip. I don't know. Well, hey, that seems, it almost seems, it's always funny to run people because from my standpoint, boy, that seems much more complicated to me than just complex, I should say, than just running it kind of standard hex crawling way. But hey, if that works, I always think it's good. I definitely think that people too often, and I need to do just a video on point crawling, but I think people too often look at it and say, I have to do hex crawl or a point crawl. Whereas in reality, I almost think they work best when they use them together because there's so many instances in hex crawl, whether when you're following landmarks or roads or rivers, that you essentially are on a point crawl already. And then I think there's no reason to give up some of the more interesting bits about hex crawling because you're on a point crawl, because if you go off road, if you leave the trail behind, why not use hex crawl procedures until they can find their way back? Ryan Smith says maybe we should call it a hoint crawl. Yeah. Or a pex crawl. Would that work? A pex crawl? A Pwex crawl, maybe? I don't know. Brian Smith says maybe the old road, going back to my example, is overgrown with a specific notable kind of plant. Could be. Oh, and I do want to. I'm cognizant that we're running low on time. I think we've covered a lot of good stuff. But one thing I want to touch on is here's where you can bring in classes, also skills if you're using them. So I often think in BX. So I think, hey, there's no ranger class. There's no skill for searching or whatever in the wilderness. But I could easily see, and I think I even mentioned on my forums, this kind of idea for a very, very simplified ranger class where they basically got just bonuses to doing stuff out in the wilds like this. If you have classes, and this is a good spot for you to integrate them, you have a ranger class. This is if you don't want to give them a bunch of abilities, but you want to give them some capability in the wilderness. This is a great way to do it if you're using, like in my example, using some kind of X and 6, giving them an extra bonus to one of these. Hey, if you're a ranger, you get +2 per time spent in deliberate discovery, and you get +1 on incidental discovery because you're a ranger. It's very simple. Once you have these kinds of mechanics set up, then it's easy to add some things to them. You could even, give them another kind of bonus, like, Brian Smith says about, hey, there's a particular plant that overgrows them. Well, your average adventurer is probably not going to be able to tell one kind of plant from another, nor do they care, but the ranger might. So that's something you can feed into them in the fiction where you go, oh, by the way, there seems to be a stretch of this thing that seems to be covered with a particular herb or just a particular plant that isn't on the outskirts, and you can kind of see the pattern of it, and it seems to follow in sort of a road-like path. Great. Maybe your fighter wouldn't notice that, but your ranger type would notice it. So you can leverage that. But if you've always been thinking about how can I make some folks, and this is probably I'm sure I could do a whole other stream on this, but just as an aside. So if you want to have some classes, you want to add something to give them some hexcrawling type abilities, because thieves are great, right, for your inside your dungeons. So you think about, well, why don't we have something to make hexcrawling a little bit easier, or make this kind of exploration easier? And that's where I think if you don't want to go into the kind of mystical Aragorn sort of ranger and all that stuff, just an easy way to make a ranger and give them some important stuff, depending on how your campaign is, maybe really important skills, is just once you have your system set up for these kinds of checks, lean into them and say, hey, you get some extra bonuses. You are better than this than everybody else. Just like the thief is better than doing some of the internal sneakiness stuff, you're better at doing the external discovery stuff. Michael Linky says, well, a dungeon crawl has you move along squares in the map. The thing you're naturally crawling and the shape of the underlying abstract map don't necessarily need to agree. No, but and the other thing is, Michael, that's true, but I also don't share my dungeon map with the players either. So to me, it's just in terms of the fiction either way. It's the spaces are larger. So in a dungeon, we're concerned about 5 feet. In a hex, we're concerned with either some fragment of a mile or miles, depending on what we're doing. Right. So you can almost look at it that when you're hex crawling, it's like a dungeon, but each square is 6 miles, is a 6-mile hexagon. But that is analogous to your squares. And much like how I don't describe to my players, they're 5 for 10-foot steps along squares, but I'll narrate them what they find, same way as they're moving across the hexes, I'm narrating what they find. But in terms of classes having opportunities, I don't want to say to shine, but to be a little bit more useful, such as thieves having the ability to, unlock traps or unlock locks and disarm traps and do that kind of stuff. Dungeony, I think it could be just as fine and as powerful to have rangers have some extra stuff in their pocket, in their bag for being out in the woods. And just like as a thief, you can do it in very simple ways, like with the specialist and Lamentations, where it's just, hey, everybody has a 1 in 6 chance, and the thieves just get some bonuses on top of it that they can scale, or specialists do if they want to be kind of thiefly. So too, you could do that for a ranger, give them sort of those same kind of things, but on outdoorsy type stuff. Brian Smith says the thief would have a compass, but the cool places are always where the compass especially doesn't work anymore. Got to get the ranger. Yeah. And thieves, that's just not their thing, right? You don't think of, I suppose I don't really think of thieves as sort of engaging with the wilderness in that way, even if they were like bandits. I think of them as more being next to roads and doing things because they prey on organized activity. They're not just kind of wandering if you wander the wilderness and you run into some thieves, either it's their camp or they're in a really bad spot, or you're not as far away from civilization as you think. Because what are you going to bandit if there's nobody there? Michael says it's a difficult analogy to work with. Hexes share properties of both squares and rooms. I mean, only in terms of their sides, really. I think if you really drill down to it, you're doing similar things. You're searching rooms, you're encountering things in rooms. It's just, sure, you have, but just like a square only has 4 cardinal directions, I don't limit my players to moving. Okay, you have to strictly, if you're inside a room, you have to strictly move north, south, east, west. You're just moving. Only in terms of combat, it might be important. And I play Theater of the Mind combat, so I'm not even really having them worry about squares anyway. My players never see squares, just like they never see hexes. I'll just give them kind of rough square footage of, oh, it looks like it's about 30 feet down. Oh, this is about 20 feet wide, that kind of thing. It's really, it's all how you visualize it. I think there's a lot that could maybe be more in common with these things than maybe we do. Certainly there's things like hunting and things like that you don't really do in a dungeon, and the time scale is different. But I think there's a lot in common there. But of course, it's all how you visualize it, how you run it. And there's, as we've seen through doing all these videos, and I'm sure if you've watched other videos of mine, there's no paucity of different methods. Well, I think that's all we've got. Let me know in the comments if there was more. Is there stuff here talking about landmarks and discoveries that I didn't cover or I missed, or you think I could delve in more? I'm always happy to do more or to write a post on it, put it elsewhere. I'm not sure what I'll do next today. So I believe, if everything holds up, tomorrow I will be interviewing Ray Otis about Gygax 75. So look out for that when I plan that video. And then Friday will be the OSR Reddit Roundup, I think, as usual. And then we'll see where next week takes us when we get there. Though I don't think I'm going to stream on Monday. It's Juneteenth. I think I'm going to take that take that holiday. My daughter's off from school also. So we'll probably do something. Spend some father-daughter time. Maybe I'll do some gaming with her. I don't know. Michael says you got to go back and watch my intro. Doing it, but not doing it a week at a time. Yeah, I think a lot of people are doing different time segments. I think the week is good for me. It just lets me space them out. And I like to. I think I said this on the yesterday or Monday. I think is when I did the Gygax 75 chapter or first challenge 1 stream. Is that I like to let the ideas marinate. So it gives me a chance. It forces me to kind of think about the things and let it sit a bit instead of racing, which I think is helpful. But it's once you get down the steps, I think you can do it a ton of different ways. But we'll do this one a week at a time, and if it ends up being something we want to do again as a community, maybe we'll do it faster. We'll see. It's all fun to do it. Anyhow, I gotta run, everybody. Have a great, give us a thumbs up on your way out if you don't mind. And if you found yourself in here not subscribed and you feel like subscribing, that would be awesome. I want to say I'm less than 20 or I'm about 20 subs away from 2,000, which is crazy. So, hey, tell your friends, tell your enemies. If I could get there by the end of this month, that would be awesome. Just because it would be about a year since I got to 1,000, and then to make 2,000 in a year would be kind of cool. So we'll see. Brian Smith says that their D&D group is canceled 3 weeks in a row, but because it's everybody's spending family time, I'm happy for everyone to enjoy the summer. Yep, it's been hard. I've actually had a couple of shortish game nights in the last couple of weeks. I got to do a recap some point pretty soon, but I think I may have lost a player, if not permanently, then temporarily, due to they just don't have enough free time and they need to do family stuff. So yeah, I totally get it. T2K coming up soon. Yeah, it's coming. Hey, hopefully sooner rather than later. I don't know if I'll have anything to do. Maybe I can do something fun for the 2,000 subs. Maybe, I don't know. People don't usually do milestones that way. And it's funny because they go up and down. So it's like, I've got 2,000. Now I'm back to 1998. Now I'm 2,000. Now I'm back to 1999. Who knows? We'll see if we get there. Anyhow, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, folks. Peace out. I will talk to you later.